Already have a few people in the waiting room. Evelyn Lord, Harvey and Alan Fruman, Howie Hockman, Julie, Rabbi Julie.
Okay.
Matt just got on, so I'm letting him in.
Okay, good.
You know, the turnout last night was better than what it looked like because one of the Mona had the whole JCC board in the conference room.
Oh, really? Because I saw Rob Rogers was there. Bill, could you turn that down a little?
Yeah.
I think Rob was remote from home, but Mona was on, and their whole board was in the conference room.
That's great. I mean, I thought that was kind
20
of
people,
I mean,
and we didn't account for last night.
yeah, I took, you know, me, I take notes. I have little pieces of paper all over my house. And I have the names of the people who were on for both of the meetings that we had.
Yep.
And I was trying to put them in categories, but I had a
Like
hard
which
time.
agency they represented.
Yeah, which ones they can. That's why I
Yeah.
sent you those notes.
Yep.
I have to tell you, I got a note from Alan Evantash later in the day.
He's a Kutz representative.
He's Kutz, but what had happened is he was my conduit to get to the Kutz board. And he was going to the meeting. Anyway, I had talked to Matt, you know, that there was somebody who was concerned about, he and Peggy have been married before. They have 4 children. One lives out of town. It is not an issue, nothing to be thought about, but the 3 of them are all married to non-Jewish people. All 3 girls were bat mitzvahed. And he was very concerned when he read whatever he read after I got him going to do it, about how people were recruited for the study. And, you know, I tried my best, but so when Richard asked, so Peggy, Alan sent me a note list and he goes, thank you. It was really very helpful. Matt's explanation made a lot of sense to me. He said, but now I'm ready to kill Leslie and Ed for reaching out to Richard. And so I wrote him back and I said, I said, not to worry. I had already spoken to Matt that there was somebody who was concerned about who was touched and I was going to connect you individually just as well that everybody heard the explanation.
Yeah, I mean, Ed, yeah, you know, when I got this thing from Ed about Alan Evantash thinks we only did people at synagogues.
No, and I had already texted with him on that that we had unaffiliated and how we did it. But you know, take my word for it's not so good.
Well, I hope I didn't offend him, but I thought it was a useful.
No, he was kidding.
Mm-hmm.
He was kidding. I mean, he was laughing and he said, you know,
we were being responsive, I thought.
Right. And he was very, very, very complimentary to Matt, you, and to me as the moderator, and to the whole
who's
study.
Married to someone not Jewish?
What?
Who's married? He's Jewish and she's Jewish.
No, Peggy and he are Jewish, but Peggy's 2 girls who happen to live next door to me in Lewis, and Alan's daughter, Stephanie, the 3 girls are not married.
Oh, the first marriages were not, okay.
No, the children's are not married to Jewish people.
Okay, got it.
You know, Alan's concerned that when Peggy goes, the girls won't have anything. Anyway, it's time for it's time for party.
You got 7.
One more time.
You got 7 in the waiting room. All are Seaside people. I did get an email back from Rabbi Vogel.
I saw that.
Lewis. He got it and he's planning to join us.
Right.
So we included Chabad.
I wonder if anybody I thought I looked up Peter Zoll and Joel Simon while I had nothing to do while you were talking. And I found that Joel Simon was on the JFS Sussex Advisory Board. He dropped off. So I watched who was on.
Yep.
Peter Zoll stayed on. I don't know why he did or didn't, but maybe I don't even know how we found out about it. But anyway, I'd let him in.
And Leslie, you're going to do the intro and the Q&A. And Rich and I are just smiling.
Looking pretty.
Okay. I don't know if I can do that. All right. They're all going to come in. Thank you,
You're in
Matt.
Florida, Seth?
I leave in the morning.
Oh.
Early morning flight. Here we go.
Have a good trip, Seth.
Thank you.
Hi, Larry.
Hello. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello there.
This is like we can, this is a minion, as they say.
Yeah,
Yes.
really. Well, wait a minute. I'm not Evie, so hold on a second. I gotta fix this.
Hi, Elaine in the background.
How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Good, good.
Hi,
I see.
Rabbi.
I see Susan Aronson. Does that mean that she's back from from South America? There you are.
That
Welcome
means
home.
I'm back.
Welcome home.
Thank
Where
you.
did you go, Susan?
Where did I go? Oh, I went to Rio and Iguazu Falls, Buenos Aires, and then a cruise down the coast of Argentina and up Chile
Sounds
with
great.
a stop at the Falkland Islands.
So what was the best part?
Hold on. I'm sorry, my
I have-
mouse is not cooperating.
I have a question before we start. Is there anyone here who is on the advisory board for Jewish Family Service? Joel, I think you are or were, but I'm not sure.
I'm actually not on the advisory board.
Okay,
Mm-mm.
all right. Because we did reach out to the executive director and asked that they participate this evening. Okay. Again, I have a different time on every one of my devices. So by my clock, it's 7 o'clock somewhere. Is everybody in agreement with 7 o'clock somewhere?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, I tell you, this is our third one of the smaller groups, and we had a larger one in January. And I realize how far I've come, because a few years ago, I would have thought the northern ones were my home. And now I feel like this is my home because I know almost all of you, to say the least. So for me, that says a lot about what's happened to me in my years of retirement. And Rabbi Vogel, I met you looking down from my porch over the weekend. So welcome. Okay, so I hope some of you were able to participate in the town hall that we had in January, where we had an opportunity to look at our statewide data. And by statewide, I have to include the Brandywine Valley, which includes parts of Pennsylvania. And the purpose of that was to give you an overlook of what we found in the study. And on the Federation website, there is a copy of that town hall. There is the executive summary, which was shared. There's the full report. And there are all the many, 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 many data tables that go along with it. After we finished the town hall, we had agreed with Braindeis that we were going to do some smaller sessions. So I know Larry participated in the one for synagogues last Monday. And last night we had one that was specifically for the beneficiary and social service agencies in Delaware. It's not rocket science to tell you that those organizations, with the exception of JFS having an office in the Lewis Rehoboth area, that all of those were geared towards the northern part of the state. So we felt that it was really important, given the growth of the Jewish population in Sussex County, that we have a special session just for Sussex County. A couple of things. Number one, please know that all of the data, and you're just going to see the tip of an iceberg tonight. All of the data is public information. It is meant to be used by everybody who is interested and particularly those who are involved in organizations that are looking to do strategic planning. We're hoping that this will be data-informed strategic planning. The presentation tonight will not give you everything there is about Sussex County. It will just give you a part of it. And Matt's presentation will give you a hint of the many, many, many things you're going to be able to find as you look more closely at the data. And let me just say from the beginning that we don't expect that all of you are whizzes at data analysis. So it is going to be the Federation that will identify resources, and I don't mean money resources, but I mean people resources that will be interested and available at helping all of the organizations in our state make the best use of the data. Where will that come from? Well, there are some people who are on the boards who are very knowledgeable and are able to do it. And we've identified some of them throughout the process. But we are in a state that is rich with universities and colleges, and we are hopeful that we will make alliances with them that will help us to help you do the data analysis that you would like to do. Federation will also be providing some resource to help the organizations and synagogues to do strategic planning. That's part of what's going to happen. After tonight, Richard and I, who have co-chaired this process over a number of years, will be stepping back. And there are two co-chairs, Jen Goldstein, who Susan, you'll know, was a member of our committee and a data whiz on her own terms. And Jack Blumenfeld will be chairing a committee that will be looking at what happens next. What do we make the best use of it? So I hope that sets the table for tonight. The format for tonight is Matt will do a presentation for about a half hour. It is not going to be the same presentation that you saw. So for those of you who have been here, were there in January, this is not a repeat. He'll give you a quick overview just to catch up those who were not. And then he'll delve into some data, not all of it, just some of the data for Sussex County. If you have a question that's on your mind and you're afraid you're going to forget it, put it in the chat, and that will be an opportunity for us to go back after. You can ask the question then. We're a small enough group tonight that I think we'll let people raise their hand. I'll call on you and you'll be able to ask questions. But if you're like me and sometimes you forget the question that you want to ask, just put it in the chat and it'll be a reminder and you will get called on. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Matt Boxer. Matt was the principal investigator from Braindeis. Braindeis, as many of you have heard me say already, is the premier organization doing Jewish community demographic studies around our country. Matt's particular expertise, for which we were very grateful, was working with small and intermediate communities like ours. All told, the Braindeis has done more than 25 of these studies, and we'll say more about some of the connections that might be helpful to us in the future after we're done. So Matt, I turn it over to you.
Thank you. Let me get my screen share set up. So with any luck, you should now be able to see one of my screens with my PowerPoint slides. And I want to start off by saying thank you. It's really been a pleasure to work with your community and to join you once again tonight. Most of you probably don't know, but I have a small personal connection to your community in particular. Before the pandemic and before my nieces and nephew were all teenagers, my sister's family used to spend a week every summer renting a cabin near the boardwalk in Rehoboth Beach. But between the pandemic and the kids all getting busy with their separate summer activities, it's been a few years, but They really enjoyed their summers by the boardwalk. In any case, I'm glad to see a few familiar faces here from the previous public presentations of the findings of the study. I hope you've all had the opportunity to at least start looking through the report, all 118 pages of it. I know it's a lot, and an additional 221 pages of technical appendices. But there's a lot there, and it's important to start digging through it so you can figure out how best to use it. These studies always produce very rich information. It's a lot more, as Leslie said, than what can reasonably be included in a PowerPoint presentation or even in a report. And of course, this particular presentation is going to be slightly different from the previous three because this one is focused specifically on highlighting some of the findings for Sussex County. So it's important to start with some of the findings from the overall study because after all, this was a study of the Jewish community of the entire state of Delaware, plus a small chunk of Pennsylvania. So we might as well start at the beginning. The first question in most community studies is how many Jews are there? And we estimated that there are almost 26,000 Jewish individuals living in Delaware or the Brandywine Valley and about 12,600 households. Now, there are also some non-Jewish folks in these households, about 6,000 adults and 2,100 children. These additional 8,100 people, the adults don't consider themselves to be Jewish, or they, in the case of the kids, they are not considered by their parents to be Jewish, but they are part of the Jewish community because they're part of Jewish households and Jewish families. And as I noted in January, the tricky thing about the kids in particular, both those whose parents consider them Jewish and those whose parents say that they're not, eventually they're going to grow up and have the agency to make their own decisions about their identity. We don't know today which kids whose parents don't consider them to be Jewish will go off to college, meet friends who will drag them along to Shabbat dinner at Hillel or Chabad, sign up for a birthright trip, discover how wonderful it can be to be Jewish, and choose that part of their heritage as a salient personal identity. And we also don't know who among the children whose parents say that they are Jewish will grow up and decide that that's not an identity they want to keep. But tonight specifically about Sussex County. So how many of these 25,900 Jews live there in your part of this statewide plus a chunk of Pennsylvania community? Well, here you can see the breakdown of the population by region. Having told you that there are 25,900 Jews in Delaware and the Brandywine Valley, naturally, the next question for tonight is how many of them live in Sussex County? And you can see in the table that we estimate 18% of Jewish individuals in the full geography that we studied live in Sussex County. But what's the exact number? You're going to do the math yourselves, and it's going to come out to around 4,700. But we prefer to report only in percentages, not specific numbers like that. And there are several reasons for that. One is the overall estimate, the 25,900. It's an estimate. It's not an exact number, and it's a rounded estimate to the nearest 100. And similarly, the estimate of 18% is rounded to the nearest whole number. From looking at this table, it could be 17.5%, it could be 18.4%, it could be somewhere in the middle. But the most important thing is this, and this is true of everything we report in the study. Because these are estimates, there's a danger of over-specifying them, and especially when we deal with subgroups within the overall population. Math is an amazing thing. If you collect the data in exactly the right way, you need the same amount of information to report on the Jewish community as a whole in a single town, in a county, and the entire catchment area of the Jewish Federation, in a census region, or in the entire country. But the nature of a survey is that you have some number of respondents for the entire population, and then you have to drill down to a particular subset of the population. Only now you don't have the full, I think it's 1,065 respondents anymore. You only have however many respondents came from Sussex County, which I believe was about 200. In fact, I think it might have been 200 right on the nose. So you have a lot less statistical power to do the analyses that you need to do. Now, that's a technical limitation, but it means that we have to be even more careful when we analyze subgroups like geographic regions than when we analyze the entire population altogether. And I wanted to start with this tonight because I know that you're going to do the math, and I want you to understand why we didn't do it for you. So Sussex County is home to 21% of Jewish households and 18% of Jewish individuals, adults and children in Delaware and the Brandywine Valley. And whatever the exact number of Jews is in Sussex County, what I think is important is that if we compare to your last study in 1995, which is so long ago that I was still in high school, when the geographic regions in that study were cut a little bit differently, and Sussex County was combined with Kent County, but in that combined region, the reported Jewish population estimate for the two counties together was only 1,600 people. So now we have an estimate of roughly 3 times that in Sussex County alone. So regardless of anything else, right off the top, we know that even though the Jewish community in Sussex County is still pretty small, it's a lot bigger than it was 28 years ago. Now, I'm sure you already knew that, so let's move on to some other findings as well. Now, the central analytic framework that we use throughout the report is something that we call the Index of Jewish Engagement, which reflects the predominant patterns of Jewish behavior in the community. Now, this isn't something where you can walk around to people in the community and ask them, what kind of Jew are you? It's based on a very complicated mathematical model that assesses 18 specific behaviors, and it assigns our survey respondents to one of these 4 groups based on the overall pattern of their Jewish behavior. So it's based on what people do, not what they call themselves or the demographic groups to which they belong. And that's what makes it so useful. Labels that people apply to themselves, like denomination, calling themselves Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, or just Jewish, they don't necessarily map so neatly anymore onto behavior. And particularly in places like Sussex County, where you have an independent congregation and you have Chabad, but you don't have other congregations. For a lot of American Jews, denomination just means the synagogue that they belong to, if they belonged to a synagogue. So what do those labels mean in a community like yours with an independent congregation and a Chabad, which typically also draws from across the entire denominational spectrum? Moreover, we have all different kinds of stereotypes about demographic groups like age, intermarried versus unmarried, or synagogue members and non-members. And these stereotypes hide the complexities of Jewish engagement rather than illuminating them. So I'm not going to spend as much time describing these groups today as I did at the town hall in January, but you can see here the relative sizes of the 4 engagement groups that we found in Delaware and the Brandywine Valley, ranging from 38% of Jewish adults who are minimally involved in Jewish life, they don't really have a whole lot to do with Jewish organizations of any sort, to the 19% who are wholly immersed in Jewish life. And here you see the breakdown of the 18 specific variables that we use to create the index across our 4 engagement groups. And they're broken down into 4 categories: holiday behaviors, ritual behaviors, organization behaviors, and individual behaviors. And in the other presentations, I highlighted one area or another based on what group I was talking to. But in your case, there's no one specific thing to focus on. All of these things apply to Sussex County. Just you're looking at different groups of people that exist within your community. So there are some slight discrepancies between what you see in this table and what you see in the tables throughout the report where we address these 18 specific variables. The short explanation for that is that in the other tables, we're reporting on the observed behaviors across each of these variables of the people who happen to be in each engagement group. But what this table is showing is a little bit different. This table reflects the mathematical model that, taking into account the totality of the data that we collected, shows for each variable included in the model the probability that a member of a particular engagement group has engaged in that particular behavior. So it's a technical difference, but it is nevertheless a difference. So you might find some minor discrepancies between this and the tables throughout the report and in the other slides that I will show you tonight. Now, if you think of these groups in terms of market segmentation, it might help you use this information to engage with the different groups. For the minimally involved group, there usually isn't a whole lot you can do to reach out to them. You just have to do what you do. You put on the kinds of programs and activities that you put on, and you hope that if they ever decide to reach out to you, the high quality of your offerings is going to be attractive to them. And for the immersed group, there isn't a whole lot that you have to do. There's already a 99% probability that a randomly selected member of this group is participating in Jewish programs, and a 49% probability that they say they participate often. And 91% of them are members of a congregation, which in Sussex County means either Seaside, Chabad, or an out-of-state congregation for the small number of seasonal residents who are members in their other community where they spend part of the year, but not in Delaware. You really can't do a whole lot better than that. So the question is, what do you do with the two groups in between, the holiday and the personal groups, as we call them? You're already getting some of them to participate in programs, but the odds of a member of the personal group participating often are about 1 in 4. Whereas for members of the holiday group, they're only about 2%. And there's a 67% chance that a member of the holiday group would join a congregation, but only a 27% chance for a member of the personal group. So how do you get them more active or get them active at all? For the holiday group, everything is about Jewish holidays. So this time of year, you have an opportunity with them already. And the question really becomes, what more can you do around holiday programming? Not only the once a year when a particular holiday pops up. These are going to be the people who, if they're interested in classes where they can learn more about Jewish holidays and maybe life cycle events that can be treated like holidays in some key ways. You can give them opportunities to volunteer that are tied to specific holidays. Because we have so many of them, that will give you regular opportunities to engage with them. And you can even include some of the secular holidays as well, but tie Jewish values to them. Organizations like American Jewish World Service and Repair the World have very specific programs for that sort of thing. As for the personal group, they're really more interested in Jewish culture more broadly. So they're the group that needs the Jewish book clubs, the klezmer concerts, the kosher cooking classes, speakers about contemporary Jewish life, things of that nature. And one more practical note on the engagement groups. We don't recommend that you think of them in terms of how to get people to move from one group to the next most engaged group for a couple of reasons. First, this is really intended to be descriptive. It's meant to assess the way that people are engaging in Jewish life and not to suggest that they should do more. If that's your value, that they should do more, that's fine. But our position as researchers is that we don't want to be the Beit Din. We don't want to sit in judgment over anyone. We just want to describe what people are doing Jewishly. Second, the engagement groups really aren't hierarchical. There's clearly a low group, the minimally involved, and there's clearly a high group, the immersed. But the holiday and personal groups in between, one is not necessarily more engaged than the other. They're just engaged differently. They have different interests, different wants, different needs. And so they engage in in Jewish life differently. And third, these are really just mathematical constructs. As I've said, you can't walk around the community asking people which engagement group they belong to and expect them to know. You're more likely to have success using the findings about the groups if you think about the kinds of people who fall into each, figure out what appeals to them, offer more of it, and make sure that people know it's available. People are going to move between these groups over the course of their lives, but if they're becoming more engaged, it's not going to be because you tried to move them up some sort of hierarchy. It'll be because you had something that they were looking for. You had programs and activities that appealed to them, that got them to want being more part of your organization, to be more of an integral part of their lives and their identities. And if you do what you do well and you offer people what they want and what they need, engagement is just going to take care of itself. You won't have to worry about it. So that's Jewish engagement. But this group might want to know if the patterns of engagement look different in Sussex County than they do in the rest of the study area. So here's what that looks like. So you have a little over a third of your population that has little to nothing to do with Jewish life, in fact, right on the average for Delaware and the Brandywine Valley. And you have about a third who are wholly immersed in Jewish life, which is at the top end of the scale for Delaware and the Brandywine Valley. The shading in the table indicates that there are statistically significant differences in engagement patterns between the regions. That means we're at least 95% certain that the differences we observe between the regions are not merely an artifact of whoever we happen to get to do the survey. Rather, they reflect real differences in patterns of behavior between the regions. So Sussex County has the highest share, along with the Newark area, of people who are wholly immersed in Jewish life. And that's a pretty common pattern for people for whom Jewish life is important, but who live in places where there isn't a whole lot of Jewish infrastructure nearby. The people for whom Jewish life is critically important tend to be even more active than they might have been if they lived in a community with a larger Jewish population. In my research on small Jewish communities, this comes up a lot. If you think about going to services, in my hometown, I grew up in Niagara Falls, New York. When I was growing up, we used to have the same 10 people show up every week to Shabbat morning services. And it wasn't because they were particularly religious. It was because they knew if I don't show up, there's not going to be a minyan. Sussex County has a much larger Jewish population than Niagara Falls did, so the effect probably isn't quite as strong, but the same general principle applies. In a small community, if Jewish life is important to you, the analogy I frequently use is that it's effectively a contact sport. You have to get in the trenches and get your hands dirty, but if you aren't personally responsible for the community's success, it's not going to succeed. So you go to services every week, even if you're not particularly religious, because you know your community is counting on you to be there. By contrast, where I live today in the Boston area, there are about 250,000 Jews here. Even if Jewish life is important to you, it can be more of a spectator sport. If you don't go to services, it doesn't really affect much. Your presence or absence doesn't make a difference to whether or not there will be a minyan. And where in Niagara Falls, not only did you have to show up so there would be a minyan, but everyone had a task during the services. Everyone had an aliyah, or they did Hagbah or Galila, or they led services. By contrast, here in the Boston area, pick out a person attending services at random, and they may as well be at a concert or a performance. They're watching other people do Jewish things, and they're part of the audience. If Jewish life is important to you and you live in a small community, it tends to take up more contact sport features. And your community, although it's much bigger than Niagara Falls, is much closer to Niagara Falls than it is to Boston. So I think that partially explains why you have so many people in the immersed category. Now, a typical table in the report, or at least the top half of it, looks like the image you see on the right side of the screen. Most of the tables include the breakdown for the population as a whole. That's all Jewish households across the top, and also how the variables break down across key groups, specifically the engagement groups, the regions, ages, in-married versus intermarried versus not married, and whether or not there are children in the household. So you can see by flipping through the pages of the report how Sussex County compares to the other regions on virtually every variable that we report on. Here we're looking at table 5.1 from page 47 of the report, which shows that, it shows in the first column whether or not anyone in the household belongs to any synagogue, temple, independent minyan, chavra, Chabad, or high holiday congregation, whether it's local or not, whether they pay dues or not, whether the congregation that they say they belong to has membership or not, because not all of them do. The second column shows how many of those belong to a congregation that is located in the state of Delaware or the Brandywine Valley, with the rest belonging either in another community where they live for part of the year, a community where they used to live, or in particular for the folks in the Brandywine Valley in the Philadelphia area. I don't think there are going to be too many folks going from Sussex County to shuls in the Philadelphia area. So you can see, for example, that there are some discrepancies, some small ones, between the two columns in Newark, Wilmington, and the rest of Newcastle and Kent County regions, and a very large discrepancy in the Brandywine Valley, where a lot of those folks are either going to Philadelphia, or I think we had 19 respondents who belonged to a synagogue that was just in the next zip code over, across the border from where we had stopped covering people in the study. It's the thing about demographic studies, you have to work with well-defined specific areas, but the Jewish community doesn't necessarily limit its participation in Jewish life to those confined geographies. So the Brandywine Valley is a little bit complicated in this way, because if we knew when we started this project what we know now, we probably would not have extended the study quite as far into Pennsylvania, and we would have had fewer respondents who belong to synagogues that are better classified as part of Philadelphia's catchment area. But we have what we have, and so given what we have, Sussex County is somewhere in the middle. You have a 10-point discrepancy, not 32 points like the Brandywine Valley, but not 3 points like the rest of Newcastle and Kent County, 2 like Wilmington, 6 like Newark. Now, I know the history of Jewish residents in Sussex County would suggest that these are seasonal residents who maintained a membership in the other communities where they live for part of the year, and we do have a few of those. But there are at least as many respondents who live there year-round who have maintained memberships where they used to live, but they haven't joined Seaside or Chabad. So that explains the discrepancy in Sussex County. Here's another fairly typical table from the report, or at least an excerpt from it, that illustrates one of the key themes that emerges throughout the report. Again, where you see shading, that means there's a statistically significant difference between the groups being analyzed on the variable in question. So here we see there is no statistically significant difference between regions belonging to Jewish organizations aside from the JCC or synagogues, but there are statistically significant differences belonging to informal or grassroots groups and to the Siegel Jewish Community Center. So to say that a difference between the regions or any other subgroups within the community for that matter is statistically significant, again, it means that we are 95% certain, or more than 95% certain, that the observed difference reflects a real difference between the groups being analyzed and isn't just because of who we happened to be able to get to take the survey. So put another way, if we do the survey the exact same way again, we would expect to see the same kind of difference again because it's real. It's a reflection of differences between the regions and not a result of random chance. So we see here that although Sussex County is at the bottom of the list on belonging to Jewish organizations, aside from the JCC or synagogues, the difference there isn't big enough for us to be pretty sure it's a real difference, though it is at least suggestive. And on the other two items here, informal or grassroots groups and the JCC in Wilmington, Sussex County is again at the bottom of the scale, but here the differences are big enough. On informal or grassroots groups, Wilmington has far more members than any other region, because those groups are most likely to exist in Wilmington. And on the JCC, it's again not surprising that there's a general trend that the farther away you live, the less likely you are to belong. So I would bet that the tiny number of respondents from Sussex County who told us they belong to the JCC either used to live up north, or it's possible somebody made a mistake. When they said that they belong to the JCC, they checked yes instead of no. It happens. So you can find regional information like that throughout the report, but sometimes there's information that wasn't included in the report, either because if we included everything, the report would be 1,000 pages, or because, well, there's some other technical reasons that I'll get into in a moment. The information might still be useful, though, and so we've tried to make it available in an easy-to-use reference that we call the comparison charts. So what you see here on the screen is the top of the first page of Appendix B from the technical appendices. The comparison charts are intended to be what I think of as a cheat sheet, sort of a place where you can look up values for key groups within the community quickly without having to dig through the report or run analyses yourself. But we don't actually put the charts in the PDF of the appendices. Our experience has been they're more useful if you just use them as Excel documents. So if you were to click on the link that I've shown you on the screen here, or copy it into your web browser, you end up on the Cohen Center's website on a page that looks like this. So you see we have an abstract of the report, a copy of the cover, links to read the report, the executive summary, the technical appendices, and download the comparison charts and the public data set. So if you download the comparison charts, there are 12 files there, 12 different Excel files, one for each key subject covered in the survey. And so we're going to take a look at some of what you might find there and how it might be useful for you. So this might be a little bit small on your screen, but if you download the Excel files, you can make them as large as you like. I believe what you're looking at here is from the 8th file on anti-Semitism and current events. So you can see that the rows show for the key variables being analyzed what proportion of the overall population has a particular characteristic or holds a particular attitude. And we also have broken down those variables by engagement group, by geographic region, 3 age groups, in-married, intermarried, and not married, households with and without children, and synagogue members and non-members. So the columns represent the key variables from the survey. So here you see first how concerned respondents are about anti-Semitism in the local area, in the US, and around the world. Next, whether the respondent has personally experienced an anti-Semitic incident in the past year. And if we scroll farther to the right, we have respondents' political orientations as well. They don't really go so neatly with anti-Semitism, but we need somewhere to put that variable. So again, where you see shading, there are statistically significant differences between the subgroups being measured. So for example, we see that there are differences in concern about anti-Semitism in the local area and in the US by region, but not around the world. Sussex County has the highest level of concern about anti-Semitism, which is likely tied to having the highest proportion of people who have experienced anti-Semitism. Now, I know there have been some incidents with, for example, anti-Semitic flyers being thrown into people's yards, some deeply offensive anti-Semitic speech from politicians in recent years, specifically in Sussex County, that might help explain why the numbers are as high as they are. Anti-Semitism in the US is, on the whole, a matter of being the price we pay for being a minority in the US. That doesn't make it okay. It's just the reality of our circumstances. But in small Jewish communities, it often goes one of two directions. Either the entire community, both Jewish and not, makes it clear that anti-Semitism won't be tolerated anywhere in public, or incidents become so commonplace that it's difficult to hold people to account. In the latter case, you especially need to watch out for children in their schools. In any case, if you haven't already, make sure that you get Federation involved when significant incidents take place. Get the ADL involved. That's what they're there for. There are lots of resources available to help communities fight anti-Semitism, but they don't always get used, so you should make sure that you use them. And because the report is structured the way that it is, with us having to set up certain concepts before we can introduce them into tables, there's some analyses that might be of interest to you in particular that aren't included in the report, but are readily available in the comparison charts. So for example, here are 3 regional breakdowns from the first file that are easy to miss from the demographics. Again, the shading means there are statistically significant differences between the regions. So respondents from Sussex County tend to be a little bit older than the rest of the study area, and somewhere in the middle of the pack on educational attainment, but with fewer folks who have less than a college degree. You're also middle of the road for the rate of being married at all. More of you are married than the respondents from Newark, but fewer are married compared to the Brandywine Valley. And if you account only for the folks who are married, the individual intermarriage rate in Sussex County is about 63%. That's comparable to the Newark area, but it's higher than the other regions. So that's what the comparison charts look like. Most of the questions in the survey show up as columns in one of the 12 Excel files in the comparison charts, and region is one of the key variables for analysis in all 12 of the files. Now, we like to close our surveys with a couple of open-ended questions, the first of which is always about respondents' perceptions of the community's strengths and weaknesses. And you can see on the screen here, I pulled a few of the quotes from respondents in Sussex County. Now, as I noted in the presentation for the agencies last night, it was difficult to find respondents from Sussex County who sang their praises in particular. And I think that mostly has to do with the fact that being as far away as you are from where they're located, you just have a much harder time accessing anything they have to offer. So a family in your community can't realistically enroll their child in the Jewish Day School in Wilmington or one of the JCC's programs because you don't want to spend 3 to 4 hours driving back and forth every day. And for the families with kids in Sussex County, given the price of gas, they might not be able to afford it even if they had the time. So you do your own thing with Seaside or with Chabad or with family and friends without the advantages conveyed by closer proximity to Jewish communal infrastructure that you have in the northern part of the state. The overall question here is, what can the communal infrastructure do to make itself more accessible to the Jews of Sussex County? Satellite facilities may not be entirely practical, although you do have a little bit of that with JFS. But can Federation, the JCC and JFS in particular, partner with Seaside and with Chabad to provide a little bit better for the needs of Jews in Sussex County? Can more programs be made accessible online for those of you who can't drive up to Wilmington? Can you come up with creative solutions just to provide more Jewish resources to more Jews in your area? And the second open-ended question at the end of the survey was about where respondents find satisfaction, joy, and meaning in Jewish life. And again, you see here a selection from Sussex County Jews. Family and traditions, both religious and cultural, are the themes that came up most often. But it's also clear there's an altruistic streak in the Jewish community and a desire to have more opportunities to interact with other Jews, whether while engaged in specifically Jewish activities or in more secular fare. And considering that when we asked respondents the extent to which being Jewish was more a matter of this factor or that, Sussex County respondents tended to score highest on culture and peoplehood. None of this is very surprising. I think of this as another way of assessing what people are looking for in Jewish life, and these comments are a pretty good summary. They're looking for family and friends, tradition, culture, and making the world a better place. So if what I've presented to you tonight makes it seem like I'm overlooking what makes Sussex County unique or different or special, I assure you I'm not. The totality of the data actually suggests that you're not so different from the other regions covered in this study. There are some real differences, and I've highlighted a few of them, but you're not only a niche market for seasonal residents as you might have been in the past. In fact, only about 1 in 10 Jewish households in Sussex County have a second home anywhere. And of those, a little over 2/3 think of Sussex County as their primary home. You have a much larger, more diverse population than you did in the past, and that makes you much more similar to the rest of the Jews of Delaware than you used to be. But it also means you have both quantifiably more and more diverse needs than you did in the past, and the Jewish communal infrastructure hasn't quite kept up. But between what you've built at Seaside and at Chabad and what some of the agencies based in Wilmington are trying to do to catch up, I'm confident you can get there. So I'm going to end the presentation there, stop sharing my screen. As I noted in January, there's a whole lot more in the report and the appendices and the comparison charts, but I hope you found this a useful summary of some of the key findings for Sussex County. So with that, ready to start taking your questions.
Okay, David, we'll start with you.
Okay, thanks. So I'm concerned about two specific aspects of this that aren't necessarily reflected in the study. One is, I'm a member of Seaside. I've been a member of Seaside since we moved here from Maryland in 2014. One is that clearly our part of Sussex County, meaning the area on the eastern side of the county closest to Lewis and Rehoboth and Bethany, et cetera, continues to grow at a phenomenal rate in terms of the number of housing units being produced. That by itself may not be significant for the Jewish community, except for the fact that the vast majority of people that are filling these houses are coming from somewhere else, typically from large areas where there are a fair number of Jews who are retiring, such as Washington, Baltimore, Philadelphia, and also the Wilmington area. All of this means and suggests to me that we can expect continued growth of the size of the Jewish population in Sussex County for the foreseeable future. And the second aspect is the incredible, as you mentioned before, diversity of the backgrounds of the Jewish people moving to this area and therefore becoming part of our community. We are and always have been a diverse group. We will undoubtedly continue to be that way unless additional synagogues develop in our area. So my concern is, how do we continue to successfully address both of these phenomena?
Yeah, complicated questions, but important ones. And look, the number one factor for how do you know more Jews are going to move in is, what is the state of your economy? If the local economy is strong, if there are good jobs available, that's usually the best indicator of future growth. It's a little bit more complicated when you talk about retirees because they're looking for a comfortable place to retire, not a good job that's going to pay them a good wage. But they still need doctors and lawyers and accountants and all of the ancillary services that go along with those industries. And Jews are disproportionately in those industries because we are disproportionately better educated. We disproportionately have the credentials that are necessary to get into those industries. So if you have a robust economy, if your cost of living is still relatively affordable compared to God knows the DC area is appalling for its cost of living. Baltimore is catching up rapidly. Philadelphia is a bit behind them, but who knows how long that will last. And Delaware is a very comfortable place to live. You can expect to get Jews moving in as long as there are good jobs and good services for retirees. You'll get both of them. How many? Hard to say. You probably aren't going to get. I remember when I did Pittsburgh's study in 2017, they were at the time a finalist for Amazon's second headquarters. And I remember telling them, if you get the second headquarters, you're going to go from 50,000 to 70,000 Jews within 5 years. I still stand by that. They didn't get the headquarters, so it's a moot point. But you can see similar patterns in other communities where big industries come in that need a lot of highly educated people. The Jewish population explodes. It happened in Seattle, it happened in Orlando, it's happened in lots of other places as well. So, it's really just about the state of your economy. Now, how do you deal with that at Seaside? How much help is Chabad providing to help you meet the needs of people who aren't coming to Seaside? You're probably appealing to two slightly different demographics. Some people might go to both. But as more Jews move in, you might need more of those sort of typical Orthodox conservative Reform Reconstructionist synagogues, and there might be enough Jews of those particular flavors to support synagogues of the different denominations. That's going to happen organically or not. I think the bigger concern for me would be, what do you do with the people who aren't that interested in the congregation? Because although the people who are interested are the most engaged Jews in the community, they are not most of the Jews in the community. They're the Jews you see most often, and so it's easiest to remember them when you're thinking of who do we need to provide for. But the majority of Jews in every Jewish community in the country, with a rare exception, are not members of synagogues. They're not going to be members of synagogues at any randomly chosen point in time. And you have to think about, what do they need? Now, at the moment where Seaside and Chabad are, they're the only game in town. If they want cultural programming that isn't particularly religious, if they want holiday program that isn't about come join our congregation, you're still who they have to go to. If the community grows, it might not stay that way forever. So it's. I'm sorry, Leslie, you were.
No, I was going to say Marilyn had her hand up too, so I wanted to make sure she had an opportunity.
Sure.
Right. So I was wondering if in all of these research projects that you've done across the country, if you have encountered a synagogue similar to Seaside that might serve as a model for ideas and approaches. Somebody that's also, not affiliated and trying to accommodate a wide variety of needs.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think I've gotten that question before. There are a number of unaffiliated synagogues that pop up in study. There are some in virtually every community around the country, so of course we encounter them. But in terms of trying to meet the needs of everybody, lots of different groups, the one that comes to mind is the Kavanah Cooperative in Seattle, which I think they spell their name just Kavana. And if you Google them, somebody did a survey for them a number of years ago. It should be available on the internet. I might even have a copy. If I can find it, I'll email it to Seth and he can circulate it.
Matt, as a follow-up to Marilyn's question, Seattle's a big city with multiple resources available to the people who live there. In your studies across the country, have you come across a community where whoever it is, whether it's a JCC or a synagogue or a Chabad, is the only game in town, and is, you know, it kind of dealing with trying to be all things to all people? Is there another small community out there that you've done that either a portion of it, like we are a portion of, is in that position?
So I've encountered communities that have synagogues like those. They have not done community studies like this. Communities that are small enough, like Sussex County, to have a situation where there is one organization that is the only game in town, typically do not have the resources to sponsor a community study. You were able to do one because the Jewish community of Delaware is not really one community. It's a loose confederation of about 5 small communities. And so there's a little bit of an economy of scale there. But you would not have done a Sussex County, Delaware Jewish community study on your own. It wouldn't have been feasible. So the places that tend to be the only game in town, probably 95% of them are Chabad. It's the thing that Chabad, well, it's one of the things that Chabad does better than literally everyone in the Jewish world. They go to places that need Jewish services and have none, and they provide them. So you'll find them in places in South Dakota where there are 300 Jews who live in South Dakota, but there's a Chabad there. You'll find Chabad at every major tourist destination, except I think Niagara Falls, New York, where I grew up. I believe they have one on the Canadian side, but you'll find them in every major tourist destination in the country for Jewish tourists. In fact, I've always felt they should come to Niagara Falls. There's no better place to do Tashlich on Rosh Hashanah. But there are occasionally very, very small synagogues that you find in communities where typically the Jewish population will be no more than several hundred or a couple of thousand people, where they are the only game in town. They sound a lot like the descriptions I've heard of Seaside. But they don't have community study data. They don't have representative sample data to be able to make direct comparisons.
Other questions for Matt? So a couple of things that came to my mind listening. We as a Jewish world are very concerned now about security. There's no question when we look at the data around anti-Semitism and violence that we're reminded of too many days out of every week. At the same time, the way to reach people who are not members of any organized Jewish group is to reach out beyond who we are typically talking to, meaning we're not talking just to ourselves. And if we keep doing what we're always doing, we're going to get the same results. It is a matter of finding creative ways to use what I would call the secular media to reach out and try to find people who are not Jewish and welcome them in. That's one thing for consideration. The other is because the organizations on this call are the only game in town, we are going to be struggling with different life cycles that people are going to go through. and whether it is enough to develop a preschool, which I know we've put our toe into, or as our retirees age in place, what are the opportunities there? And I would encourage since I don't, is there anybody here from Jewish Family Service? I don't want to say anything out of turn. So I would encourage both Seaside and Chabad to, have conversations about what they see as their role in providing services to Jewish people along the lifespan, whether they do it unto themselves or they do it in partnership with others. But there is going to be a need over time, whether they are for young people getting older or older people getting older still, to determine what will be the role that each organization will play, which clearly feeds into the need to do strategic planning. Matt was really clear that the Jewish people in Sussex County were looking for connections around cultural and social. We already know we have dedicated people who are immersed, as he calls them, but we have all those other people out there, and how do we find them and what do we do with or for them is a question for the boards of both organizations to consider. And it's not easy answers, but they are questions that I believe, as a member of Seaside, who has been involved in the Delaware Jewish community for more than 40 years, that it's a question that I think needs to be answered one way or another, because we are the only game in town. And we don't have to do it alone. We do have Federation, who is going to provide resource, both in terms of getting at the nitty gritty of the data, because this was just to show you a little bit of what's in there, but also to help with the strategic planning process.
So just to piggyback, just a question, when you talk about the resources of the Federation, what do you have in mind when it comes to, let's say, the communities down here in Sussex County reaching up to the Federation up in Wilmington and saying, hey, can you provide for us? Like, what are we asking as leaders in the Sussex County Jewish arena? Like, what help are we asking for, and what help can they provide?
I think those are two different questions. So I think
question one and question two.
Yeah, I think the first question has to be answered by each of the organizations. One may decide they want to do X or Y, and another may want to do the same thing, but.
Well, I guess question two comes before question one. What are they able to provide? And then once we know what they are able to provide, that will determine what we are asking for.
Well, I'm not sure I agree with you with the order of questions, but that's okay. I think the first thing is to begin to think about what are the questions that you have. And I think that I'm going to turn it over for Seth just to see what I'm going to mess up. But I believe that the first step is helping you to identify data that will be helpful to you. So, I think it was you, Rabbi Vogel, who asked the question about the ages of people in Sussex County. Somebody asked that question earlier. And I think breaking down that information, or finding out how many intermarried families there are, and, some of the demographic information, which will be very useful for planning things. That will be something that the Federation will be able to do, which is to connect the different organizations, whether they be synagogues or agencies or service organizations, with resources to help with that data. Now, I don't know enough, and you all know a lot more than I, who's in your own communities and who's part of your congregations that maybe has that kind of skill and talent. But if there aren't any, I think Federations, one of their jobs is to connect you. Braindeis we have paid for a certain amount of that as part of our project. So if we have, questions, we can get some of them to Braindeis for further consideration. Beyond that, in terms of the strategic planning process, I'm going to turn it to Seth, because I think that's a question better answered by him.
Sure. So strategic planning, I think we have to look at it two ways. One is from the Federation lens, which we position ourselves as the community convener. So we're looking at the entire community. We have already formed a strategic planning task force with members from all three counties, as well as the Brandywine Valley. We're going to reimagine what this data looks like for the whole community, but I think each synagogue and each beneficiary agency need to do it themselves as well. We all have different missions, but if we want to build community, we have to learn how to do it together. And I think part of the strategic visioning, the strategic task force that Federation has assembled is going to help us facilitate that.
And the idea is to identify people who know how to do strategic planning with a Jewish lens. And I'm not going to tell you that they're going to be able to foot the bill for each organization in the state of Delaware to do that. But I think we can do some matching that, you know, and combining of resources. Joel, I think you're on that strategic planning task force, right?
I am.
So you can be the link instead of me. We can change places. But I think that's a good question, Rabbi Vogel. I mean, you need to know what the rules are before you get started. But I you know, this is something that Larry and I talked about earlier, is I think you have to begin by asking questions. What information do you want to know? What's going to be helpful to you or to us, since I'm part of the community here? What's going to be useful to us to be able to plan? And some of it's going to be, you know, questions about the mission of the organization, for lack of a better way to put it. What do you want the business of it to be? Is it just going to be religious services? Is it going to be social? Is it going to be educational? Is it going to be what I would normally have called Jewish services, whether they're targeted at any age frame? And that's a question that nobody can decide but the boards of those organizations.
There's also short and long term.
Yeah.
And there's also mission and vision. So who we are today and who do we want to be in the future? So these are all things that have to be considered.
But the data is there. I just can't say it often enough. The data is there. It's public information. It's overwhelming to look at all those files. It will make your eyes roll. I have a little more experience than the average bear with some of that from work I did, but it makes my eyes roll. And Richard will tell you he already is rolled. But we do have resources to help us. But, you know, you don't want all the information in the report. The question is, what do you want and what's going to be meaningful to you? And that's the first step, in my opinion.
For sure. So in short, resources means a lot more data than we would have on our own. And you mentioned possible funding, no committing, but like the idea of matching. Essentially, we have answers, just basically informational resources, essentially.
Well,
Possibly funding, but primarily information.
I think it's more, I think the first, two things. Number one, I think that the Federation, and I can't speak for them, but I will give you a hypothesis based upon my opinion, is that I think this was a wake-up call. And I think that rather than seeing themselves, I was involved in the study in 1995. I was a sweet young thing back in those days. And you know, Kent and Sussex, the numbers were just so small that they extrapolated data. We're in a different world now. Instead of being heavy north and light south, we're pretty equally distributed. So I think the world is different. I think that Federation has to look at itself and say, how do I best serve the people of Delaware, not just the city of Wilmington and surrounding areas? So that's one thing. I think the other part of it is I think you're going to see the agencies, I'm guessing, having some conversations about where they provide services and how they provide services. And I think that Seaside and Chabad have a role to play in deciding who do they want to partner with. Do they want to do some, there are many synagogues around the country that run preschools. Okay. It's a very common occurrence. In Wilmington, you don't have one synagogue who runs a preschool. They're all done at the Jewish Community Center. So that would be a good example. Is it going to be synagogue or religiously based run, or is it, or are you going to want to say to the JCC, hey, do you want to come down here and run a preschool for our kids? And the same could be said for all kinds of programming. So I believe that it's what Federation's going to do and should do, and I believe that they will do. But I also believe it's going to be up to the organizations to make some decisions, and they can't make those decisions without you. You know, they can't say, gee, I'm going to come down and run set up a home for the Jewish elderly. You know, it won't work. They have to do it in partnership. So you have to decide, who do you want to play with and what do you want to do yourself?
Fair.
Well, if I can add one thing to that, part of the advantage of conducting your study with a group like mine, aside from the fact that we think we are great at this, is that because we've done so many studies, we effectively have a network of communities that the challenges that they face might not be exactly the same as the ones that you're facing in Sussex County. They're unique challenges to working in the Jewish community in a small Jewish community that don't apply in bigger cities. But depending on the specifics of whatever it is that you're trying to do, we may have seen this before. Some other community may have seen this before. They may have tried some of the things that you want to try. They may have learned lessons about what works and what doesn't. So, for example, the last one of these community studies that we were rolling out that I ran was Louisville, Kentucky, where there were two big challenges in particular they had. One having to do with engaging with young adults who largely they didn't realize they had, but it turned out they were a very significant chunk of the population. They just weren't involved in Jewish organizations. So they have to go out and get them. They have to find out what they want, what they're interested in, what they need. They hadn't done any of that. But we'd conducted Nashville's study in 2015, at which point Nashville had been through a similar process over the preceding decade. They've done a lot of experimentation with going out and getting the unaffiliated young adults. And there were a lot of specifics about the circumstances between Nashville and Louisville that we were very comfortable telling the folks in Louisville, we have contacts in Nashville. Let us set you up with them, and you can talk to them about the young adults. Their other big challenge was about engaging with intermarried couples and their families. And what we were seeing in Louisville was very similar to what we had seen in Kansas City 6 months earlier, which was very similar to what we had seen in Pittsburgh 4 years before that. And Pittsburgh has done follow-up research based on what we found in their community study, which Kansas City was going to be able to take advantage of. Boston has also done follow-up research on some overlapping aspects of their challenges, reaching out to interfaith families. And so these other communities are able to talk to the people who we talk to in these other communities, get the wisdom of their having done follow-up work of their own based on their community studies, and they don't have to start from scratch. Now, that said, Kansas City is in the midst of doing some follow-up work themselves right now. They're in particular focused on intermarried couples and newcomers to the community. But they don't have to ask exactly the same questions that Pittsburgh and Boston and some other communities have asked. They can take what those other communities have learned and focus their time and their resources on other questions that weren't answered in the research that other communities have done in the aftermath of their community studies. So, you're part of that network now too. You can take advantage of that, and you should take advantage of that. We hope you will.
Matt, to access that, and there was a question in the chat about our connecting with other communities that have had similar struggles and challenges and advantages that Sussex has had. I'm assuming it's a two-way street, that you'll work through Seth and share where you think it's appropriate, and that as we come up with issues or questions, Seth can share back with you for any suggestions.
Absolutely.
Aviv, does that answer your question?
No, it does, because at the end of the day, I think we've got to put our emphasis and energy on not trying to reinvent the wheel. I just think we need to learn from other communities that had a head start and probably went through some of those struggles that we can learn from. That's all. So thank you.
Seth put the Braindeis website in the chat, and I encourage you to take a look. These are all the communities around the country that have had studies. You may not want to reach out to them now, but as it becomes appropriate and you know what you're looking for and who to have the conversation with, it'll be a good starting point for later. Anything else? Marilyn.
I just want to say that this has really been such an enlightening thing to listen to the reports and to have the benefit of all of this data. I mean, to me, one of the eye-opening things is we often at Seaside talk in terms of serving our members, but you've really kind of opened this up to all the people who are not even members and what is our role there. So I just want to thank you for bringing all of this to us.
Thank you. Always good to hear.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think that it's an opportunity there are some of the struggles that Seaside will face, which are similar to other congregations in our state. And Larry attended a session, as did some of the folks from Chabad, about to connect with other synagogues, because some of them are, you'll excuse me, membership issues. Recruiting and retaining members. That would be something that would be across the board, whether you live in one county or another. However, there are going to be things that are unique to our geography, and it's going to take some hard work and creativity, thinking out of the box and trying to balance how do we reach out to people we haven't, and what do we want to do for today and tomorrow. So thank you all for attending. Appreciate your involvement. If you have questions for Matt, the best way to do it is through Seth. You can also reach out to me, and I'm still connecting. But the Federation is going to be changing, and this is the beginning of a new day all around. Nothing happens automatically and nothing happens quickly, but it will be an evolutionary change. And I look forward to being part of it. So thank you and good night, everybody. Have a good Pesach.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.